welcome to tonight's program about women diplomats who have been navigating issues of weapons, security, and peace throughout their careers. My name is Kelly Scandoni, and I am the programs coordinator for the Diplomacy Center Foundation. This month is Women's History Month, which is about celebrating the contributions of women, both past and present. So we're really excited to bring this conversation to you all, exploring the careers of these incredible women. For those of you that might not be familiar with the Diplomacy Center Foundation, we are the nonprofit partner to the U.S. Department of State in creating the National Museum of American Diplomacy. Right now, the museum is under development in Washington, D.C., but once it's fully opened, it will be the nation's first museum dedicated to telling the story of American diplomacy. Throughout tonight's program, you can join the conversation by using the chat function on the right side of your screen. You can also ask questions to our panelists throughout the program via the Ask a Question box located at the bottom of your screen, and we will try to answer these during the program. Now, should we encounter any technical difficulties, because they do happen, please bear with us as we try to resolve them. If your screen freezes or if you lose audio at any point, try refreshing the screen and hopefully this will bring us back to you. It's now my pleasure to introduce tonight's conversation catalyst. Joining us is Ambassador Bonnie Jenkins. She is the founder and executive director of Women of Color Advancing Peace, Security, and Conflict Transformation. She was also the State Department's special envoy and coordinator for threat reduction programs from 2009 to 2017. We're also joined by Ambassador Laura Kennedy, who is the former Deputy Assistant Secretary for European and Eurasian Affairs. She was the U.S. Ambassador to Turkmenistan and to the Conference on Disarmament, as well as the U.S. Special Representative for Biological Weapons Convention issues. And then finally, we have Ambassador Eileen Malloy. She was the Senior Advisor to Secretary of Energy Bill Richardson and the Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs. She also served as the U.S. Ambassador to Kyrgyzstan and was the Chief of the Arms Control Implementation Unit while serving at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. Now, please keep in mind that tonight's conversation does express the personal opinions of our panelists, and it does not represent the views of the Department of State, U.S. government, or any other organization. And with that, I'm going to hand things over to Reva Gupta. She's a Foreign Service Officer and was formerly the Public Affairs Officer at the National Museum of American Diplomacy, where she led their Diplomacy After Hours program. So Reva, take it away. Oh, Reva.
Right.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Sorry. Before we kind of jump into this conversation, I wanted to just also express how much of an honor it is to be in company with all of you, with you, Ambassador Jenkins, Ambassador Malloy, and Ambassador Kennedy, as well as with our audience out around the world. So, and again, Kelly mentioned this, but I would also like to underscore that we would like this to be as much of a conversation as possible. So please type in your experiences, share your stories, ask your questions, as well as we are moving through this discussion. So we would like to make this as interactive as possible. So I'm gonna begin and ask all three of you this question that's sort of a double question. And I'm gonna go ask Ambassador Jenkins to start first, and then Ambassador Kennedy, and then Ambassador Malloy. Can you share a story, or share the story of how you began working in this field? Was this an area of foreign policy that you were drawn to, or something you fell into? And then if you could also add, maybe that story can also capture what the field looked like at the time that you entered, and then maybe even share some thoughts about what it looks like now, if there is a significant change. So Ambassador Jenkins, I will turn to you first.
Great, thanks. And I hope everyone can hear me. I think of the options you said, you asked about in terms of how I got into it, I think fell into it is probably the one that fits for me. I did not really have an interest in the field of weapons of mass destruction or even foreign policy, really, until I was doing my Presidential Management Fellowship Program at the Department of Defense. And it was at that time and that I was exposed to some issues on strategic arms and nuclear weapons issues, and I fell in love with it. I said, "This is amazing. This is what I want to do." And I said, "I want," and I was at the time in the legal office because I'm a lawyer, and so I knew that there was really only one place to do the work I wanted to do and actually be the lawyer for those negotiating treaties overseas of weapons of mass destruction. And that was a place called the Arms Control Disarmament Agency, which is where I went to work in the General Counsel's office, so I could actually be the work with the go overseas, do these negotiations of treaties or treaty committing bodies, and be the lawyer for the ambassador and the delegation. That's how I got into it. In terms of how it differs, what I will say is when I got into the field.
Oh,
It looks like we lost Bonnie for a moment. Let's see if she comes back quickly. Okay. While we wait for her to reconnect, can I ask Ambassador Kennedy for you to share with us your story?
Sure. I was both, I guess, drawn to it, but also sort of pulled into it because I had spent most of my career up to then working either in or on the Soviet Union. So when I was finishing in Moscow the second time, I was specifically recruited to be sort of the Soviet area advisor for the conventional arms control talks in Vienna, which I joined in 1985. And I would say, in terms of what the difference in the field from my first experience in 1985 to today is, it's vastly more inclusive where women are concerned. When I arrived into those talks in Vienna in 1985, I don't remember another female diplomat in Vienna. This is a multilateral negotiation. But things began to change, and I'm happy to say that the U.S. delegation there really sort of led the way, featured a number of outstanding women. Definitely not the case with our sort of major partner or adversary, however you want to put it, the Soviet Union in those days, where not just in arms control, but in diplomacy, I literally, in all the years I worked in this area, I never met another Soviet diplomat, nor female, nor did I even hear of one in those days. That certainly was a complication. Now, when I moved over to nuclear work in 1998 in Vienna, there was already a handful of women, particularly in the international arena, the International Atomic Energy Agency, women who are making their mark internationally. They are stars in the field. There had been a few women ambassadors. There were none in the actual senior leadership of this key nuclear institution. But things were absolutely changing. And then in my last time there in working with nuclear issues, 2014 to 15, dramatic difference in the number of women in senior positions. Still a long way to go, but from almost none to well represented with lots of, is a big change in my experience.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Ambassador Kennedy, for that reflection. Ambassador Malloy, can you share your experiences? We can't hear you, Ambassador. You're still muted. There.
Okay, there we go.
There you go. Mm-hmm.
I actually came to arms control via bilateral. I, like Laura, spent most of my career in things Soviet or the immediate area. I had studied the language since I was 13 years old, and I won't tell you how long that is ago. I'd been an exchange student twice. But the things that really caught my interest was on my first tour in Moscow, I was lucky enough to get to note take at meetings when Yelena Bonner would come to Moscow, from Gorky, where her husband was exiled, and just give us an update of how he was doing and things like that. And then I worked in the science section and really got a bird's eye view of how scientists in both these countries were working closely together. And that really drew me to arms control because I saw it as a way to expand the window of opportunity for peace between our two countries. As far as the difference, yes, as Laura said, there are now many more women, which is great. The not so great thing is that when I started on this, arms control was a key topic of interest, both to a wide range of American people and in terms of funding and personnel. Now, what I see is funding for these things is endangered. And also, we have far fewer people studying Russian language and studying the Russian bilateral issues. And so, in the long run, our capabilities of understanding behind the scenes is going to weaken a bit. And I know you're going to go into that question later on about the need for both technical expertise and area studies.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I believe that Ambassador Jenkins is with us via audio. Maybe due to sort of bandwidth issues. Ambassador, are you with us via audio right now?
Yeah, I can hear you. I don't know if you can hear me.
Definitely, yes. We can hear you.
Yeah, I turned off the screen because I figured maybe it's going to help. So,
yeah,
sorry.
I'm sorry that. Well, we can see your photographed image, okay. which is better than nothing. So you were in the middle of sharing with us what the field looked like when you joined it and what differences you've noticed.
Yes, and I think what I was saying is pretty much covered already now. When I entered the field in the early 1990s, it was a field that, as others had mentioned, was still very much not very many women, particularly women ambassadors in the field and what I was doing. And that has certainly changed. There's a lot more women in the field. What I'm happy to see is a lot more young women are entering the field, and I hope that they will stay engaged. And of course, when I entered, I said before, I'm not sure when I got cut off, but I was talking about the lack of people of color, of course, in the field. And one of the reasons why I started my organization was really, not just peace and security, but because I saw such a continued lack of people of color, even through all my years. It just wasn't increasing. And so one of the reasons why I started the organization really was to start focusing on these areas of weapons of mass destruction and security, just to start developing, if not more people, just an interest in these fields, so that it wouldn't be so there would be such a dearth of people from different backgrounds. And so I'm seeing that starting to change, and that's positive.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I have a number of questions for you actually about your organization, but do you want to even just give a little bit of background on your organization for the rest of the audience right now?
Sure. Just very briefly, the organization I started in 2017. And as I already said, one of the main reasons was because of the lack of diversity in the fields of, particularly the ones we're talking about, weapons of mass destruction, but also in other fields as well of international security and peace and security, and broadly defined. And even in those areas of peace and security where you might see more diversity, you still don't see very much diversity at the top where the decisions are made. So there's a number of reasons why I started the organization. One is the one I just mentioned. Another one is to develop this network and support system to keep women of color and people of color in the field, and so we don't lose people in the pipeline as it goes forward. So really, that's really the reason I started it. It's really focusing on both the people as well as the culture of organizations and what must change. So thanks.
Great, thank you. So my next question is, again, if you can, you all know that I really try to focus on storytelling as a means of conveying information. So if you could share particular challenges that you faced in this field because of your gender or race, and maybe, particularly if you could share a story and how that may have impacted your work. And then sort of on the flip side, in addition to challenges, maybe even some of the highlights and the benefits that you have experienced. And so, again, Bonnie, do you mind if I start with you, and then I will go to Ambassador Malloy and then Ambassador Kennedy to answer these different questions?
Sure, and I'll be brief. I think one of the things that that I faced as a woman of color in the field, and there was not only the racial difference of the gender, but also I entered when I was young, and so it was like three whammies that I dealt with, and so there was a lot of imposter syndrome there. There was a lot of why am I here? Do I belong here? The usual stuff that goes with being in a situation where you're not part of the predominant culture, and you've been, and as we know, we tell women and people of color all through their lives that they're not as good. And so you kind of carry that with you, whether you deserve to carry it or not, or whether you should. I think that was part of it, but I do. One of the things that was good about going to the meetings and being part of the negotiations is that, as being the lawyer for the delegation, being the lawyer for the ambassador, I didn't have a lot of opportunities to sit there and be upset about it. I didn't have the opportunity to sit and say, oh, I shouldn't be here because I was asked to do something. I was asked to, what's your legal opinion? What should we be thinking about? Or how should we write this text? Or how will it be perceived when we go back to Senate to get confirmed? So there was a lot of work to do. And so, I didn't, the good thing is because of the role that I had, even though I was young and a woman of color, I had to step up and do the job. And I think that was probably one of the best ways to not sit there and get into my own head about why I shouldn't be there, why everyone else is there, and so much smarter than me. And I
Yeah.
think that was really helpful.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Ambassador Malloy and then Ambassador Kennedy.
I think for me, the biggest difficulty was opposition to females playing any role other than being an interpreter on the part of the Soviets. When we were negotiating the implementation of the INF Treaty, they just were absolutely adamant that we wouldn't have female inspectors. And as we drilled down what the problem was, why did they not want it? They subsequently said, well, we'll have to build facilities for them. Only men do this in the Soviet Union, and so we'll have to build facilities. So we ultimately won the day because we said, well, in our society, we don't exclude inspectors because of their sex. So you're going to get them. They're going to come, and they're not just going to be interpreters. Well, it turned out the facilities they were referring to were outhouses at the different bases. And so as the inspectors went out, they had these brand new, spanky, oozing pine wood outhouses for the women, and the men had the older ones. So this allegedly was why they couldn't have women. And then over the 2-year period, when we talked with them more and more, they kept asking us why we were insisting on women, and were these women there to do laundry for the other inspectors or to keep them company or whatever. They just absolutely couldn't quite accept it. And I'd like to think at the end of this 2-year period that we showed them that women actually could do this. And as Bonnie mentioned, having several strikes, well, I was young, I was female, and I was also extremely pregnant at this point. So that's enough to drive your Soviet nuclear rocket specialists crazy. So our very first opportunity to go to the Soviet Nuclear Risk Reduction Center, which, I mean, it was just so big for us to be able to step into this building in downtown Moscow. One of my colleagues, US military, pulled me aside as we're walking out the door, or I waddled out the door. I was 7 months pregnant. And he said, of course, there's no women there and there's no ladies' rooms. They have no reason to have a ladies' room. So this was a full day of talks. So about lunchtime, they gave everyone a break to use the facilities. So everybody left except me. I just sat there at the table because there were no facilities for me. So a little Soviet gentleman was dispatched to come to me and say in English, we have a seat for you too, which turned out to be his way of trying to tell me they did have a ladies' room. So I think it's much better now, but it was almost unheard of for a female to be in this closed club back in those days.
Can I actually ask you a little follow-up? Being pregnant adds a whole nother layer to this work, and then you've definitely kind of identified how the Soviet Union, the way that they saw you, and what was available and not available. How were you received by your American colleagues and maybe other European, et cetera, colleagues? I'm wondering if you have any reflections on that as well.
It was mixed. Going on a maternity leave, first of all, there is no such thing as, or at that time, maternity leave in the State Department. If you wanted to use your accumulated sick leave, that's what you did, but that was it. And in a place like Moscow, where they're so desperately understaffed, you going on leave puts a tremendous burden on your coworkers who are left behind. Some were absolutely lovely, and some were not so lovely about it. I had one gentleman tell me that because I hadn't done duty, which is weekend and night duty, while I was with the baby, that I should have it nonstop for the rest of my tour, so that I could make up for the burden that I'd placed on him. So yeah, it's a mixed bag, but you adapt, you adjust, and like Bonnie said, you're so busy you don't have time to do much aside from pushing forward and getting the work done.
Yeah. Ambassador Kennedy.
I was going to say, I already alluded to the fact that when I started, although it was block to block, the U.S. and Russia were the key parties in these conventional arms control negotiations, and literally no women. So that was a downside when it came to sort of the informal stuff. When you're doing a lot of important stuff over a cup of coffee or a dinner or something, and when it's all guys. The sort of like establishing a rapport may be, how about them football scores or something like that. But that's, that was okay. You just, you found your entry points when you could. I also had, I remember having my first baby when I was at these negotiations, and we just sort of joked about it. I mean, people said, this will be the first tangible outcome of these long-running negotiations. So we sort of tried to put a positive gloss on it. But I found my problem was sort of the burdens you impose on yourself, because I felt sort of, am I going to be letting, the side down? Because, women were still a relative rarity. It wasn't until 1972 that women didn't have to leave the foreign service if they married. So, for example, I worked up until the day before I had my baby. This was in Vienna, so you could have it there. I found an obstetrician, couldn't have done this in the States, who had evening hours, and then combined my home leave with sort of getting my baby to the stage where he would sleep through the night. So, but the system was, I thought, everybody was trying to be accommodating, but I put burdens on myself that I don't think, and I hope women don't have to today. And I'm really proud of all those women who've, actually some of the women that I mentored when I was a class mentor for foreign service started a thing called balancing act. I mean, so you have to take sort of things in your own hand and push for institutional reform. And men too, because this cannot be seen as a women-only issue. Men and women have babies. We all have parents, people who need to take care of. So it's got to be sort of, an issue for everybody and not left on to just women to deal with. But anyhow, I'm here to tell you, you can do arms control. And as Eileen said, men have kids, and mine are, didn't grow up to be axe murderers. Great kids. So it is possible, but you certainly want that support. And if you're not getting it, push for it.
So actually, somebody just posed a question in the chat, which I think flows in right now very well. And I'd actually like to ask all of you the same question. So, as you're trying to do your job, were you also fighting for gender equality? And Bonnie, I think you sort of you allude to this in the creation of your organization, but I'm wondering about. Well, I mean, I'd love for all three of you to answer that as well. Go ahead, Ambassador Kennedy, if you'd like to start.
Well, just this is a very rich field, and so one of the things I've always done is, aside from institutional reform, because I've been there, done that. I'm a woman. I've had kids, so I've pushed for it, to benefit myself, the folks who come after. Mentoring is so important. We all need to mentor the upcoming generation. I'll tell you something specifically I did that anybody who's worked in an international organization will be familiar with, that despite all the shortcomings we may have in the U.S., we're pretty darn good compared to most countries, not the Scandinavians. They're at the top of the list always. But international organizations pushing for women to be hired, qualified women in international organizations. These are key bodies in arms control, in diplomacy, in all sorts of fields. So we always push for qualified Americans as U.S. diplomats. And I always made a point of making sure there were women and advocating for them as strongly as I could. And something we can talk about later, but maybe I'll just, if you don't mind, I'll jump ahead into it. And that is in the UN in the year 2000, there was a Security Council resolution adopted called 1325, which recognized the burdens that the changing nature of warfare, which is increasingly targeted on civilians, posed for women and children. So it recognized that, and it also said that women need to be involved in conflict negotiations, in the measures that are adopted for these. And that, I think, something that the U.S. supported very much. And obviously, solutions are imperfect, but it has certainly, across the field, helped bring women into conflict resolution and peace activities around the world, which I think is really, really important.
Great. Go ahead, Ambassador Malloy, and then we'll turn to Ambassador Jenkins.
Thinking about the biggest battle that I had, which was when I was serving at Embassy Moscow, and what we call a ship jumper jumped ship in Malta. He was an ethnically Georgian, and he was the ship's doctor and faked his own appendicitis so well that the Maltese operated on him, but he just did it hoping that the boat would leave him behind and he could go for freedom. So anyway, the hospital was going to turn him back to his staff, so he ran away and ran into our embassy in Malta. And that was a very small embassy. It had no security, no Marines, nothing. And so they put the word out to Embassy Moscow, could you please send us a Russian-speaking officer to spend the night in the Chancery, because they were worried that the Maltese government, which was cozying up to the Soviets at this period, would bust into the embassy in the middle of the night, drag this guy out. But if there was at least one American there, they wouldn't dare do it. So I put my hand up, because these are the kind of career enhancing opportunities that you really need and want to get promoted in the Foreign Service. And I got turned down, and they sent some other gentleman, and I was a bit miffed. But anyway, well, this dragged on and on and on. And after 3 weeks, this other officer wanted to come back. So again, I put my hand up and said, I would like to do this. And I was told that the man running that embassy, was a charge at the time, didn't want any women. He would only accept a male officer. And I said, well, that's just plain wrong. And my boss agreed and went back and fought, and he won. And I got sent to Malta for 3 weeks. And then I had to deal with this gentleman for 3 weeks who felt that there must be something wrong with my morals that I would agree to sleep overnight in a Chancery with another male. And you just have to say, well, too bad. I'm doing it. It's a professional thing. If it's okay for the men, it's okay for the women. It's career enhancing. And it gave me some great stuff to put in my annual evaluation report. But you have to fight. You have to sometimes fight dirty to get where you need to be.
Yeah.
Diplomatically dirty, I mean, not.
Yes. And Ambassador Jenkins, would you like to
Yeah,
comment on this?
I'll just say very briefly. I mean, for me, what I think has always been important in terms of raising the importance of women in areas of work, particularly in ones where we're not often seen, is recognizing the importance of the knowing that you are being a role model for people who may be looking at you and you may not be thinking about that. And so there have been times when I have stayed in and not necessarily in this particular situation with arms control, but there have been times when I have stayed in particular positions or things because I knew I was the only person there, the only person of color or the only woman. And so I would stay with things only because I knew that there wouldn't be anyone. And therefore there's an obligation that kind of goes with that, which is, when you're fortunate enough to ever get to a place where you are the only person, there is an obligation in a way to being in that spot and knowing that others are out there looking. And sometimes that may mean, recognizing that there is a need to maybe commit to something because you're in that role. It's an interesting obligation. But it is one that you feel that, okay, I need to do something a little longer because if I leave, there isn't anyone. And that's not really acceptable.
It almost sounds like I mean, either sort of intentionally, unintentionally, whatever the situation, you are fighting for gender equality in some way because you're fighting for yourself to have a career. And then you're also, thinking through the mentorship and, all these other pieces.
The mentorship is a big part of it. I mean, the mentorship and because I think of myself and I think about the people who were role models to me who didn't know that they were my role models. Not everyone is somebody who I know personally or somebody who I said, I don't want you to be my mentor, but it's someone who I look up to and inspires me, and so we as women in the field need to recognize that there may be others who are looking up who you may not even know who they are, and there's an obligation there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Ambassador Kennedy, did you want to say something else right now? I wasn't sure if you were.
Seen a question from Susan Burke, which I was trying to answer online, and if there's time, I could hope you talk about it. I was going to say that aside from, we've been talking about sort of our work in government, but there actually is huge amounts of work beyond government.
Yes.
So I found that since I left the government in 2015 and have done a lot of work in the nuclear and other foreign policy fields, in the pro bono boards, public service, things like that. That's actually, I think, as important as it was during the government. I think our government is pretty committed to it, but you'd be surprised in the private world how some old attitudes linger. How foundations, a panel can put panels together where there's no man whatsoever, where people will write an article, they will quote only scholars. I mean, really no women. So, and this is 2021. That's where I think you really need to not just do your job and stuff, but act very specifically as a woman, or as a representative as your gender. And okay, people might say, well, this is an all-woman panel. Fine, this is celebrating Women's History Month, so give us a break. But so where I think you really need to make that extra effort to say, let's not have any manals, let's not have any. There's a new friend, I think it was coined by my friend Alex Bell, now our DAS in the Arms Control Bureau, of a marticle. Because old attitudes will still linger. And so aside from mentoring and so on, you can, as Bonnie said, you know, if there's nobody that looks like you there, you know, work overtime to make sure they are, or don't be part of sort of this, you know, holdovers of old attitudes.
No, thank you. I have not heard of Marticle, but I'm going to start using that now. Yeah. I definitely know of Manals. And so, Ambassador Kennedy, you actually have made reference to UNSCR 1325. I'm wondering if you can, and you know, if all three of you want to, in provide stories with regards to stories that maybe you have come into contact with that underscore how arms control and, you know, issues of conflict and war, how they impact women and children differently, and why we need to consider that within a policy context. So if there's like a story that you could share that would kind of describe some of this. And can I start with Ambassador Malloy first this time? And then I'll go to Ambassador Jenkins and Ambassador Kennedy. Can't hear you, Ambassador Malloy. You're still on mute.
There we go. Women and children are definitely more impacted by war and by conflict and by famine. And I think that's because women are the caretakers. They're the last to get up and run. They're going to stop and help the children and the older people. It's ingrained. And I'm brought to mind of the troubles in Northern Ireland. I served in Belfast in the late 70s. And what seemed to be a never-ending conflict, the first ray of hope was when Irish women got together and started a movement to bring peace at any terms. They weren't saying they needed to win X, Y, or Z. It was just stop the violence, come together. And it was really striking. They ended up getting the Nobel Peace Prize. It was an amazing thing. And I got to meet some of these people when I was there. But it brought home to me that women, when they do get together collectively, can have a really powerful impact on either avoiding conflict or ending conflict. And that's something that takes place outside of formal negotiations or at an international conference. It's just a deep-seated desire for a better future for their families and other people's families, not just their own. So I think that's a power that needs to be tapped into in better ways, more effective ways.
Great, thank you. Ambassador Jenkins, do you have anything more to add?
Yeah, could you just repeat part of the question, because it broke up a little bit when you were asking?
Yeah, no, I'm so sorry. So Ambassador Kennedy had mentioned UNSCR 1325. And so I was asking if you had particular stories that would exemplify why it is that women and children and, you know, women of color, I mean, you know, in particular as well, are impacted by conflict and war, and why this is important. So, and why these voices are important in policy making.
Yes, and I hope the sirens outside my window. Yes, I actually wrote an article on this issue about how women of color are impacted by the lack of peace and security, and it's based on research about whether you're talking about climate change or infectious disease or weapons of mass destruction or food and water security. Women of color are affected most predominantly. You can even look out right now as it was, you know, climate migration, where it's happening around the world. You could look at what's happened with COVID-19. You can look at the fact that, you know, if we were saying earlier about the lack of food and water, women having to, if there's food, like a food, who's going to get up and walk the miles to get the food and bring it back, and the actual threats to their lives in the process of doing that and going there and coming back with water as well. So, it's important to recognize that. It's important to include them in any kind of, obviously 1325, any kind of peace processes that we go through in order to do it. But I think, you don't have to go far. I mean, if you just look at what's happening, very often we don't do enough research at home as we talk about some of these issues. But if you look at what's going on here and you look at the numbers from COVID-19 and who's affected, and you look at, who's lost the most jobs, because of the type of jobs that this industry, and who's there in the service industry, who's losing their jobs, who's losing their houses, who's being thrown out of their homes. I mean, so you don't have to go far to see how women are most impacted, and particularly women of color are impacted by lack of peace and security in many ways.
Thank you, Ambassador Kennedy. You're still on mute. You're on mute, Ambassador Kennedy.
Am I off now? Okay, great. Since I started with 1325, which dealt with sort of, armed conflict, let me switch it back to WMD, which is where I've spent most of my career, weapon mass destruction, which is, of course, quite different, because you can say that these do not discriminate in terms of the targets. And we all know a nuclear weapon will wipe out, without distinction, anyone within proximity to ground zero. However, if you want to find some gender aspects, there is scientific evidence that says that the ionizing radiation released by atomic blasts, or for that matter, an atomic, an accident in nuclear, will actually have disproportionate effects on women biologically. So in terms of, say, what we've been able to contribute, I think, I can't speak for my co-panelists, but I suspect that they, like me, have spent time promoting the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, which would, legally and formally ban nuclear testing, which we as a nation stopped some 30 years ago, but this would formally, legally ban it worldwide, because there is a real legacy in terms of radiation damage. But now let me flip that and talk about the ways that nuclear energy are a great positive. And that is that, and I'm so pleased to see that Susan Burke is on this call. She was our head of our delegation to the 2010 Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty Review Conference. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because this cornerstone nuclear treaty has three pillars: dealing with disarmament, dealing with nonproliferation, and third, peaceful uses of nuclear energy. And among those are nuclear medicine. So, for example, I'm very proud of the fact that I helped support and promote nuclear medicine and the work that the International Atomic Energy Agency does worldwide, and nuclear medicine, specifically cancer, where nuclear medicine is essential. And I mention this because you asked about personal stories. I'm a cancer survivor. So this Work still means something to me personally. All the women out there who've had breast cancer, and this is a cross gender, because cancer, of course, is still a leading cause of death in the United States today. So this is part of our grand bargain on nuclear energy, and so peaceful uses and the great stuff it can do to treat cancer, for example, is personally meaningful to me and many, I think, other folks.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Ambassador Kennedy. And I want to also underscore something that is personal to me as well, but that men also get breast cancer, which is something that people don't think about or don't assume that it is going to happen. And so in any case, yeah, I just wanted to underscore that. So we have a bit of remaining time, and I really want to get to this question. So I want to ask each of you if you identify as a feminist, and how you would, what does a feminist security policy look like? And also, what does an anti-racist security policy look like? And Bonnie, your work with women of color advancing peace and security, the policy recommendations that you provide are extremely broad, both domestically as well as internationally. And I'm wondering if you can speak to that as perhaps part of an anti-racist approach, or if it's something different as well. So can we start with, let's go the way that we started before. We'll do Bonnie, and then Ambassador Jenkins, Ambassador Kennedy, and then Ambassador Malloy.
So I guess there's two answers to your question, to your original two questions. First, on feminist foreign policy, yes, I was actually involved in a number of discussions that took place in the U.S. on a feminist foreign policy, which is really looking at how to promote the goals of gender equality, human rights, peace, environment, integrity, a number of these ideals, which I think fit very closely into some of the things that WCAPS is looking, understanding the point of intersectionality and rights-based approach to foreign policy. The policy papers that we're doing for WCAPS really are an opportunity to look at some of these issues through the lens of women of color, and to understand, look at a number of policy issues from the perspective of people who have a different security lens, a different approach based on culture. And it's an opportunity to get that out, because you don't get to hear that in the prominent policy papers that are not drafted by people who of diverse backgrounds. And so it's an opportunity to be able to do that. An anti-racist policy, I'm not sure if I would call it I'm not sure what that means per se, but I want a policy that are reflective of of all Americans. We want policies that are not defined by a select group who are in a privileged class. We want policies that are reflective of the fact that different people in America have different threat perceptions based on the threats that they face when they grow up in this country. And so a policy that does not incorporate the different threat perceptions, the different cultures, the different ways in which we see ourselves as Americans will be policies that don't reflect all America. And then they can be seen as maybe anti-racist because they're not inclusive. And there's always a possibility that if you have policies that are by the predominant culture, if that predominant culture is based on all of American culture, which has racist undertones in it, then those policies will only reflect the culture in which is brought into it, which is based on a racist culture in America. So rather than saying a racist policy or anti-racist policy, I try to look at it in terms of it has to be more inclusive policy. That will help to keep it from being a racist policy.
Yeah, I appreciate that distinction. And just so the rest of our audience knows, a lot of the papers include sort of policy goals on climate change, on migration, immigration, gun violence, etc. I really enjoyed reading it. So
thank you.
And then now I'm forgetting who I said, Ambassador Kennedy and then Ambassador Malloy, I think is what I said.
Sure. I considered myself a feminist from before the time. As a kid, I even knew what the word meant. And to me, it's pretty simple. It just means guaranteeing equal access to both of the genders. I'm not sure I would talk in terms of a feminist foreign policy, but I think a foreign policy that recognizes, in cases where there are unique needs of women, to build that in, to be as inclusive as possible, both in terms of your programming, whether it's arms control, development policy, conflict resolution, you name it, that needs and any particularities of both sexes are taken account of, and that also both sexes are equally engaged in personnel at the table. And certainly when we talk about, nuclear arms control, this is pretty existential issues. So many of them are climate change, good government, whatever. But the basic point is these are tough issues, and we're going to be best positioned to deal with them if we can draw on the widest array of talent out there in terms of gender, race, you name it. But there's been a lot of good work that's been done on feminist foreign policy, and certainly certain countries specifically avow this. I think Canada, Sweden, others. So whatever you call it, I think as long as these concepts are anchored in it, that's good enough for me.
Ambassador Malloy, you're still muted. Ooh. You're still muted, Ambassador Malloy. Go ahead again. No, we can't hear you. Here, we still can't hear you. I'm sorry. That's so funky. We've been able to hear you for this whole time. That's strange.
Can you hear me?
Yes, there you are.
Here we are. Okay.
Magic.
Only recently have I started thinking the word feminist, and for all my life, I was more likely to be referred to as a problem because I was always pushing for things that my family considered inappropriate. I wanted to know why I couldn't apply for the jobs that were listed for men only because they paid better. Why should I take the lower paying ones? At university, I applied for a prestigious summer scholarship, which was only open to male students. And they offered me a truncated, much smaller version and said, would I take that and be happy? And I said, no, thank you. I want the big deal or nothing at all. To me, the important thing is to let those who want more, who want to take more risks, who feel the need to do something, to make sure the pathway's open for them. To me, it doesn't mean that every woman needs to go out and do something risky or something she's not comfortable with. I, in my younger years, never was a stay-at-home mom. And that was my choice. I admire people who do it. I'm now enjoying taking care of my great-granddaughter and doing all that kind of time that I never got in a marriage. So feminism, yes, my aunt Elizabeth, who was very much a feminist and broke a lot of barriers in her lifetime, finally opened my eyes to what I was doing was really feminism. And I'm now very comfortable with that title.
Yeah. Thank you. I always joke with some of my friends, and I'm like, as soon as someone tells me I can't do something, I'm like, how do I do it?
Mm-hmm. Even if you don't really want to do it.
Exactly. Exactly. So again, we have just a few more minutes. First, I want to. Someone actually, Magna, commented with regards to many of your life experiences. How did you cope through all this? I'm not sure that it's like a question that needs to be answered. It's more like, oh my God, you all are so amazing. How did you manage all of this? And then I wanted to also ask you, all three of you, both for women and women of color, to be in the field of international diplomacy, whatever the issue, what do you think needs to happen, or what changes do you think need to happen that can make it more inclusive for women in all the different aspects of our life that we bring to the job? And Ambassador Kennedy, I completely agree with you that it is actually both men and women when it comes to a variety of things. And so I would like to ask you, sort of policy wise, what else do you think we need to be doing? And I'll start with you, Ambassador Kennedy. and then go to Ambassador Malloy and then Ambassador Jenkins?
Well, in our own field, say in the State Department, I mean, in the final analysis, we are reflections of our society as a whole. And we've broken lots of barriers in the State Department. And we obviously have a lot of problems, but some of them, I think many of them are there not because the State Department is uniquely bad. It's not. I think it's tried. It falls short, absolutely, but I think it's constantly trying. But we do have real societal issues out there of unequal access to education, and I continue to and income inequality. And since the State Department recruits from people who tend to have advanced degrees and so on, we need to work harder at giving scholarships, making sure that they're available across the board. Again, it's not just the State Department. I think we need to tackle a lot of these issues in terms of access to childcare, to leave to take care of older people in our families. Education cost is out of sight. So I think we really need to tackle these, and we'll reap the benefits in the State Department, even while we continue within the State Department and other foreign affairs agencies to do things as we're doing in terms of now creating new senior diversity officer who will report to the secretary. There's lots of things we can do. But I think we have to constantly look at our overarching society and work for change there. That's one thing that I've enjoyed since I left government, and that is getting actively involved in politics, because these are some of the issues that as citizens we all need to tackle. So we'll have a better life at home, and we'll have a better diplomacy to represent us.
Wonderful. Ambassador Malloy and then Ambassador Jenkins.
Okay, you can hear me? Good. I have to agree with Laura. Until our society changes to the point where family care, child care, elder care, house cleaning, you name it, till that's equally shared, the burden's going to disproportionately fall on female. And I've seen far too many people burn out in the middle grades because they're in what we used to call the sandwich crunch, where they have children with needs and parents with needs, and they can't put in the brutal hours. If you think a law firm requires a lot of hours, these jobs, you're expected to sit there to 3-4 in the morning if that's what it takes, and then be back first thing in the morning. It burns women out. And so even though we bring them in large numbers and a fairly good percentage, they don't make it all the way through. So until there's more family friendly, one of the big issues right now is travel, and paying for a newborn infant to travel with the female officer. And should the government be paying for that? How do you leave a baby home alone? We need to come to grips with these things in order for women to feel that they can make it all the way through to the higher grades. The other thing that we need is support for woman's opinion. Again, it's a cultural change. If she gets talked over and she's the only female in the room, the person chairing that meeting has to bring it back and make sure she gets heard. She can't fight that battle totally on her own. So your colleagues, your supervisors, they need to be more sensitive and supportive. And here I just want to shout out to the wonderful male officers who have helped me along the way. I don't want to give the impression that everything is bad at the State Department. It isn't. There are wonderful people there who want you to grow and achieve, give you respect. And it's a career that, as hard as it's been, I'd do it over again in a flash.
Thank you, Ambassador Malloy. And Ambassador Jenkins.
Yes, thanks. First of all, I want to apologize that I couldn't be on screen. But at least you can hear me, so that's better than nothing. I guess for me, there's been so much written already about what needs to be done at State Department, and I certainly don't want to add to what's already been studied by several entities. I guess I would just say that, for me, what's important is to look at the whole person, and that's something that it's something I do at my organization, is look at the whole person, look at, what needs to be done, including, bringing in an interest from people at a very young age and getting them interested in these fields early in life before we even talk about getting into the State Department. Finding ways to increase their interest. I mean, like I said, I didn't have an interest in these fields until I got into government after I graduated from law school. So, I think, I think finding ways to encourage those that may not grow up with parents who are in the foreign service to, get them interested in these fields, I think is very important and will help in the long run.
Great. Thank you so much. So before I turn this back over to Kelly to sort of close out our session, I was actually going to thank all of you for being trailblazers for me, but my father is actually watching as well and basically noted that you all paved the way for both my sister and I. My sister is also a Foreign Service officer, as am I, and so he's very appreciative as well. So I just wanted to share that as well. And now, thank you also. You all have been amazing trailblazers for me. I deeply respect everything that you have, the ground that you've paved for many of us, and your shoulders are so strong because we stand on your shoulders. And I'm sorry, Kelly, one last thing. I have to say that so I know that the Diplomacy Center Foundation is noting that that the National Museum of American Diplomacy has this exhibit about trailblazing women diplomats. There is this wonderful photo of Ambassador Malloy in Siberia, and honestly, I wish I had time to ask her about this right now, but it is. I think your cheeks are frostbitten, but so that's for the next panel. And with that, Kelly, I'll turn it back over to you, and thank you all again.
Thank you. I mean, that's also one of my favorite pictures as well. It's one of my favorite whole exhibit. So I just want to thank you all so much for being part of this panel and for sharing your experiences and knowledges with us, as well as thanking everyone who's tuned into the conversation. I hope everyone really enjoyed it. Like Rava said, if you guys want to celebrate Women's History Month a little bit further, we encourage you to explore the National Museum of American Diplomacy's online Her Diplomacy exhibit. I did include a link in the chat, so you can click on that and it'll take you straight to the exhibit. So it shows a lot of different stories about other trailblazing women who have made vital contributions to American diplomacy, such as Ambassador Malloy. So one final note, while we do offer these ongoing programs for free, they are made possible through the generous support of our donors. So I'd like to thank those who are supporting us. We do know that times are really tough, but if you've enjoyed this program and do want to help support us in offering these programs in the future, you can donate to the Diplomacy Center Foundation using the green Support DCF button at the bottom of your screen. And we also hope that you will continue to stay up to date with the foundation and future programs by following us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can also sign up to receive our email newsletters, where we'll let you know about upcoming programs. And with that, I just want to thank everyone again for participating in the panel and for joining us. And I want to wish you all a great, wonderful evening. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Bonnie.
Oh, my pleasure.